Well, only one team can sweep the World Series now, and it's not the Dodgers.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans. Welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever it's called these days, and on Instagram. I am your pal Sully at Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram, but the best way to get a hold of me is right here on the YouTube page. And if you're here, leaving a comment, make sure to have that hashtag EverydaySully. It helps us find your comment and post them and all sorts of fun, cool, groovy things. This episode is brought to you by good friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. And let's head on over to the trivia question from the other day. And it was, how many Blue Jays have won the American League Most Valuable Player? And Argonaut Comedy, he's an everyday Sully listener. I now know Argonaut Comedy is indeed a he. Got it right. It was Josh Donaldson and George Bell. George Bell won the MVP in 1987. You could have made a case that year for Wade Boggs. You could have made a case that year for Alan Trammell. It went to George Bell, wonderful player. And then Josh Donaldson won it in a year, was going neck and neck with Mike Trout. And I think there was a little bit of Coen Brothers syndrome going on there, that Mike Trout had won it already. And so let's give it to someone else. But Donaldson did have a terrific year for the Blue Jays. Hey, speaking of the Blue Jays, well, I guess all those narratives that this was unfair looks kind of silly after game one. I guess the David versus Goliath, which I think is complete garbage. So this is a David and Goliath. The Blue Jays are, they're not a small market team with a small payroll. Please give me a break there. And I did the whole show the other day where I'm claiming the Dodgers are not ruining baseball because they're spending money. The teams that don't spend money and pocket the revenue sharing are the ones ruining, or at least putting us in a position for a work stoppage. But that's it. Let's talk about what's on the field. For the first few innings, it was going according to Dodger plan. They had the lead going into the fourth, and the Blue Jays could not capitalize on a bases loaded situation in the first. They had a runner thrown out at third to end the second inning. They couldn't get some rallies going, and the Dodgers scored a couple runs early. Kike Hernandez is just, once again, it's October, so he turns it up. He got an RBI single. Will Smith got an RBI single. And going into the fourth inning, it really looked like, okay, the Dodgers and Blake Snell were probably going to take control of it. Now, when they write the history of this game, and maybe they're already doing it, Dalton Varsho's home run probably won't be the main highlight, but it's a big one because it basically said, slow down. Dodgers are not running away with this. And tied the game. Going to the bottom of the sixth, still tied at 2. And those missed opportunities and bases loaded situations came back to haunt the Dodgers as Blake Snell, who threw 100 pitches, couldn't get through the sixth. Hey, Cash, this is when you take him out in the sixth inning. And Snell, who has been dynamite this entire postseason, had a crappy game today. Now, I know he left the bases loaded, and all three of those inherited runners scored. So his World Series ERA is 9. He was charged with 5 runs in 5 innings. Okay. Now, part of it was that the Dodgers bullpen collapsed, but he did let up 11 base runners in 5 innings. That's a lot of base runners. That is a heck of a lot of base runners. And basically, remember that Bugs Bunny cartoon when it was the famous baseball episode, and the teetotalers are pitching, and I think it's the Gas House Gorillas are just hitting a ball, and it's like a conga line around the base pass. Clearly, more than 4 runners going with the bump, 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 and like each run scoring. That's what that inning felt like. That's what that. Here's one of the most amazing stats about how bad the Dodgers bullpen performed today. Sheehan had 3 inherited runners when he came into relief for Blake Snell. All 3 scored. When Sheehan was relieved by Banda inherited 3 runners, and they all scored. I mean, that inning just kept going and going. It was a 9-run inning, and of course, it was already just turning into a station for station game. And then suddenly they brought in Barger to pinch hit for Schneider. They brought in a guy to pinch hit for the number 2 hitter. And for the first time in the history of the World Series, there was a pinch hit grand slam. And it was a lefty on lefty pinch hit grand slam. And at that moment, the grand slam, there had been a bases loaded walk. Jimenez had singled, but then the grand slam made a 5-2 game, which is obviously still close, to a 9-2 game. And then Alejandro Kirk, who really was the player of the game offensively, he got on base 4 times. Suddenly it became a rout. Suddenly it became a situation where both teams can look up and say, we don't have to use our high leverage relievers in this one. They used Sir Anthony Dominguez for an inning and a third. He wound up getting the win for the game. Yasevich didn't have his best stuff, obviously. But he only let up 2 runs, and that was key. Yes, he let up 7 base runners in 4 innings. That's not very good, but he didn't let it be blown open. And just like Snell, where they basically had the game looked like it could get away from the Dodgers, Snell allowed no runs in those early innings till the Varsho homer, but the pitch count went up and up and up. And the more the pitch count went up, the more I started thinking of 2 things. Getting into the Dodgers bullpen, and believe it or not, I'm not a very religious guy, but it made me think of the book of Daniel. And there is a omen that the prophet Daniel had in the Old Testament. Daniel chapter 2, verse 31. You didn't expect to get a Bible reading from your pal Sully. But this is where he had a great image of a great statue. The head of this image was of fine gold. Its chest and arms were of silver. The middle and thighs were of bronze. Its legs of iron, and its feet partly of clay. Meaning this great, huge, powerful structure of precious metals is on a foundation of clay that could be easily destroyed. Okay. I didn't go to Bill James. I went to the book of Daniel. And we've all been saying this whole time that the way to beat the Dodgers is to get into the bullpen. The Reds didn't have the pitching staff to pull that off. The Phillies imploded in extra innings. And the Brewers, look at, Barger matched the Brewers' offensive total with 1 swing of the bat. The Brewers scored 4 runs in 4 games, and Barger hit a grand slam in 1 swing off the bench. The feet of clay for the Dodgers, the supposed dynasty, that it's unfair. The bullpen, we've been saying that the whole time. Because Milwaukee was swinging so early and not running up the pitch count, they didn't have to worry about that. The Brewers played tight after losing that first game. It allowed them to have Blake Snell go deep. He had a low pitch count. It allowed Yamamoto to throw a complete game. He had a relatively low pitch count because they were not working the counts. And the Toronto Blue Jays did exactly that. And with that, they put the Dodgers in a situation where, like, oh dear. Now, of course, the series is not over, but 1 game in, And one team, I'm sorry, looks a lot better than the other. Let's be real. Making excuses doesn't solve anything. And we've heard them all before. It's just stress. I'm tired. It happens to everyone sometime. The ball game's on. But when it comes to performance, sometimes your body just needs a little extra support. And that's where Rugiet comes in. Rugiet.com offers fast-acting, doctor-prescribed treatments for ED designed to stop making excuses and helping you start making your moves. Rugiet makes it really simple to get started. You just connect with a board-certified doctor with 100% online, no awkward waiting rooms, no in-person appointments, and if prescribed, your treatment ships discreetly straight to your door. The process is fast, it's simple, and it's private, and it's all handled by real doctors. It's about confidence, connection, and getting back to the moments that matter. Now, visit RUGIET.com/YAK and get 15% off your first order. That's RUGIET.com/YAK. And don't forget to use our code LOCKEDONMLB so they know that we sent you. Rugiet, stop making excuses and start making your moves. So here we go. One game in. Now, of course, this doesn't mean the World Series is over. We've seen teams have the doors blown off the dump in game one and come back and win. The Yankees got clobbered at home in game one of the World Series when the heavily favored Atlanta Braves just torched them. In 1959, as they mentioned on the telecast today, the White Sox ambushed the newly minted, excuse me as I scratch my nose, the newly minted Los Angeles Dodgers in an 11-0 rout, and the Dodgers went on to win the World Series in 6. The Milwaukee Brewers absolutely throttled the St. Louis Cardinals in game one of the 1982 World Series, and the Cardinals went on to win that series in 7. You know, this still could be a 5-game series with the Dodgers on top. But it's a lot harder to see that when you see just how smart the Blue Jays lineup is. They don't always have to get the big home run. In fact, they got the home run by Varsho, the home run by Barger, and by Kirk. But most of the time in that inning, there were walks, there was little blue pits, there was smart hitting. The Dodgers have not faced a lineup this smart. There were good hitters in Cincinnati, but it's this smart in the postseason. There were good hitters in Cincinnati, to be sure, but it wasn't like this lineup. There were very good hitters clearly in Philadelphia, but not up and down like this. And Milwaukee, I thought Milwaukee had a terrific lineup. They just played super tight. And last year they faced the Yankees, who, look, they had some big superstars of the Yankees, but they're not a smart hitting team. They're swing from your heels and try to hit a 7-run homer. This is a team that is going to grind out the pitches. Now, what can they do? What could Los Angeles do? Suddenly we're in a position where we're saying, what can LA do? Well, the first thing it can do is have Yamamoto come out there and pitch a solid game and give them depth, because that depth is absolutely needed. They can also have Sasaki ready to go for more than one inning, and also put Blake Trinan in carbonite and not allow him to come out. Tomorrow, the Blue Jays are going to be throwing Gausman, who's their best pitcher. Yamamoto is, well, you could argue that he's the best pitcher for LA. I would have argued this postseason it was Snell, although the last time we saw Yamamoto, he threw a complete game, terrific series-changing, crushing loss for Milwaukee. The Dodgers have to grind out at bats. Dodgers have to come out and capitalize when they got base runners on. Dodgers have to play spotless defense, because what they don't want to be is in a situation where they're going back to Los Angeles down 2-0. They come back 1-1, then it's mission accomplished time. When you start a series on the road, you want to split. Okay, ideally you win both games, just like LA did in Milwaukee. Well, that ship has sailed. So this is where Dave Roberts has to earn his money. Now, we saw him respond from punches in the face, especially last year when they were down 2-1 to the San Diego Padres and had to throw a bullpen game. Remember, we were that close to the narrative still being the Dodgers can't win a World Series unless it's COVID. Remember that when you hear the people saying they buy it every year. They were down 2-1 to San Diego last year, throwing a bullpen game. And they wound up winning the final game 2-0 on 2 solo home runs. If they lost the series to San Diego, the talk of the Dodgers will continue to be they spend all that money and they can't win. 12 months later, as they win every year. I don't understand how people's brains work sometimes. Oh, yeah, they're lazy. This series is not over, clearly. It's one game. And the Dodgers have to look in the mirror and say, hey, I personally think it's better, and say, hey, dust yourself off. I personally think it's better to have your doors blown off than to lose a close game, psychologically. I understand in the playoffs it's somewhat binary. And maybe if you're using all your high leverage relievers and having people go an extra inning and everyone's worn out and you still lost, yeah, that's devastating. And so maybe it's not quite as binary as I make it out to be. But there's an off day tomorrow. They didn't use many of their top relievers. In fact, they wind up busting out a couple of pitchers who weren't even on the previous rosters, in the game today in Toronto. They wound up pitching Klein and Robolewski, who are not exactly going to be mentioned in the same breath as Koufax, Drysdale, Hershiser, Kershaw, and Valenzuela, and Sutton. Okay, I got to throw in Don Sutton. But they cleaned up the last 2 innings, and boom. This is when the Dodgers have to show why they're the champs. This is a gut check time. This is a moment where they have to show this is why people assumed they were going to torpedo their way to the World Series and it wasn't even going to be close. They can still do it. They got to dust themselves off. They have to make sure to put the Blue Jays in a situation where they're being overly aggressive. They need Yamamoto to give them length. They need to grind out at bats, and they have to play smart defense. It's doable. But my goodness, how the script has turned in just one game. I picked the Dodgers to win in 6. I never understood the people who thought this was a mismatch. The Dodgers have never faced a lineup like this. And I thought the Dodgers bullpen was going to get their butts kicked in one game. And I thought there was also going to be another game, which was going to be a slugfest. And if there's going to be a slugfest, I'm going to hand the keys over to the Blue Jays to win that. I still stand by my prediction. This was one of the kind of games I thought the Dodgers would lose. A game where their bullpen is exposed and falls apart. Now, if they're down 2-0 going back to L.A., well, then the tone of the series is much different. For my pick to come through, they would have to run the table. Do not panic yet, L.A. You didn't honestly think this was going to be a sweep, did you? Honestly, Dodger fans, did you think that? Then you're insane. Could this be a Blue Jays sweep? Well, I've seen more stunning sweeps than this. I look immediately to the A's being swept by the Cincinnati Reds in 1990. Now, that looked like a mismatch on paper. But the Reds played smart baseball. They got home runs when they needed it, and they had an absolutely ironclad bullpen. I thought the A's did too, but Eckersley wound up losing game 2. Either way, I digress. We've got ourselves a World Series here. But I do remember when Fay Vincent, the commissioner of baseball who just had the worst luck, the first year when he took over for commissioner after the death of A. Bartlett Giamatti, he inherited the 1989 World Series, which was a sweep by the A's that had a massive earthquake in the middle of it. And it was the least competitive World Series I've ever seen in my life. And one, I was living in the Bay Area at the time. By the end, people were like, just cancel the games. We got so much to deal with after the quake. The next year was the A's and the Reds. And when the Reds won the first game in convincing fashion, 7-0, Fay Vincent, who was pleased that he didn't have to sit through another sweep, turned to someone and said, watch the Reds sweep the A's. That's exactly what happened. Now, fortunately for Fay Vincent, his third and final World Series was the 1991, which was an absolute masterpiece. So we got ourselves a World Series. Now, Fay Vincent was ousted before the 92 World Series. And it's someone from the 92 World Series that, well, I'd like to pay a little bit of tribute to. Let's hear it from our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 to get $300 back in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5. If it hits, boom, you've unlocked $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Now, no matter how you do your bets, whether you build parlays, you do the player props, or if you follow the live lines during the game, FanDuel has you covered. It makes watching football even more exciting. We've got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan like I am or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. They showed a clip on the game today of John Smoltz as a pinch runner on third base in the bottom of the, I believe it was the 11th inning in the 1992 World Series Game 6. And it was that was an absolutely fabulous game between the Blue Jays and the Braves. And the Braves were trying to rally like they had done. They rallied against the Blue Jays in the bottom of the ninth to tie the game, just like they had done rallied at the bottom of the ninth of Game 7 of that year's NLCS against the Pirates. And they were trying to rally again. They tied the game in the bottom of the ninth, and they were trying to. They lost the lead in the 11th inning, and the Blue Jays were 3 outs away, and they still rallied. They cut the lead to 1, and Smoltz was at third base as the tying run with 2 outs in the bottom of the 11th. And Mike Timlin came in as a reliever for the Blue Jays. And Mike Timlin went on to have a wonderful career. He won a couple World Series rings with the Red Sox in 04 and 07. But that moment, I remember watching it in my dorm room, and I was rooting for the Blue Jays that year, mainly because one of my best friends in college, a guy named Randy Perlstein, was a huge Blue Jay fan, and I was happy for him. He was a rabid Blue Jay fan, and I wanted to win him because it would make him happy. And there was also some players on the Blue Jays I really wanted to see win, most specifically Dave Winfield. But when Timlin came in on this day in 1992, it raised the hairs on the back of my neck because of, well, a scenario that I kept imagining as a kid. Let me explain. When I had my dreams of being a Major League Baseball player, I wanted to be a relief pitcher. I know it sounds weird, but that I thought was the coolest position. The person who comes in, their job is to just end the game. As a kid, that fascinated me. That they're not there to throw the whole game. They're just bring them in to finish it off. And part of the things that inspired it was that clip of Tug McGraw with his arms up in the air when the Phillies won the 1980 World Series. And the fireworks went off, and the scoreboard said world champs. And they all dogpiled on top of Tug McGraw. That was the image that I always wanted to have when I was fantasizing about being a baseball player. And more than that, I had a scenario that I used to imagine as I was throwing the wiffle ball around in the front yard in our house in Massachusetts. And that was the World Series went into extra innings, and they ran out of pitchers. And the only pitcher left was an obscure pitcher, obscure rookie, an obscure player who was not one of their top pitchers to come in and close out the World Series. And alas, this pitcher, who you bet you forgot was even on the team, comes in and gets the final out of the World Series. That's what happened when Mike Timlin came in. They had already used Dwayne Ward and Tom Henke and Todd Stottlemyre. It was a game started by David Cohn. They'd used David Wells. They brought Jimmy Key out of the bullpen. Jimmy Key was a great starting pitcher. They brought him out of the bullpen. And it was down to just a couple of pitchers left. I believe Mark Eichhorn was still in there. But they brought in Mike Timlin, who at the time was, in his second year, an obscure middle reliever, and said, we are going to get you, you're going to clinch the World Series for us. And Otis Nixon was the batter with John Smoltz at third. It was Timlin's game to save. And I was in my dorm room at New York University going crazy, going like, this is my dream scenario, and it's happening in front of me. And the Speedy Nixon dropped the bunt, and it was a perfectly placed bunt. And if he had done it where it was a little further up the line, he would have beat out because Otis Nixon was like the Flash. He was Barry Allen. And if that had happened, if he did a little bit further up the line, they would never have beaten Nixon. Pinch runner Smoltz would have scored, and the game would have gone on. And Timlin picked up the ball and threw it to Joe Carter. Now, here's where the scenario went wrong. And I always think this when I see it. In my scenario, where I come in and get the final out, then everyone dogpiles on me. Like I jump up and everyone jumps up on top of me and everything like that. But when you see the celebration, that's not what happens. Joe Carter starts jumping up and down, and everyone dogpiles on top of Joe Carter. And there's even a picture of the pile happening and Mike Timlin on the outside looking in. And I remember thinking, even watching the celebration, whenever I watch it again, I said, no, dogpile on Mike Timlin. That was my scenario that I had in my front yard. Now, I'm sure Mike Timlin doesn't care. In fact, I know he doesn't care. Because Mike Timlin used to be on Twitter back when it was called Twitter. And I remember posting that clip of him getting the final out. And I said, how often do you think about that? And I went at Mike Timlin. And he said something, oh, it was one of the coolest days of my life. And I said, and I asked him, were you ever sad that they didn't all pile on you? And he kind of said, what? He had no idea what I was talking about. The guy who lived out my scenario didn't understand what I was talking about. And I think it's fine. Maybe it's because he maybe didn't have the same fantasy as I did. He wound up getting 4 World Series rings in his career in 92 and 93 with the Blue Jays, 2004, 2007 with the Red Sox. And it happened on this day in October 24, 1992. And they showed the clip again during the game, and I thought, like, why aren't they jumping on Timlin? I wanted to share that. I also just want to share very quickly that October 24 is a very important day in my podcasting life because it was on October 24, 2012 that I started the Old Sully Baseball podcast, where I did a show every single day from October 24, 2012 until opening day of 2017 because it just got to be. But I did 365 a year. Unless it was a leap year, then I did another one. And that stretch of thousands of shows a day, 1,000 shows, in a row every single day was one of the most fun things I ever did. And if you ever want to go back and listen to some of those shows, some of them are kind of evergreen. Go find the old Sully it's Sully Baseball on your podcast feed. And then I started that streak on October 24th. I know some of you who've come over to Locked On were old fans of the former Sully Baseball show. And so October 24th is always a day that was an anniversary during those years of doing that. And I didn't want to have this day go past. I've now been podcasting pretty much straight since 2012. And I've been loving it. And I thank all of you who are floating down the River Sully here when I moved over to Locked On. And hopefully you're going to continue in the off season, which Dodger fans hope is not going to happen on Tuesday. It's going to, and another just quick thing. Thanks so much for listening to us. And thanks so much for making us your first listen here at Locked On MLB. For your second listen, find the all night Locked On MLB game night, every game, every night until World Series champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB game night on Locked On MLB here on YouTube, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And let's take a look at the trivia question because we're about to go to game 2 of the World Series. Trivia question is this. What Oscar-winning blockbuster movie included a major scene involving game 2 of the 1963 World Series? A film that won the Oscar for Best Picture and was a massive box office success. Included a critical and very famous scene that revolved around Game 2 of the 1963 World Series between the Yankees and the Dodgers? Put your answer down below. I'll be eager to see how many of you get this right. Talking about Game 1 of the 2025 World Series and how people who thought this was a mismatch, well, may have been mismatching the wrong team. I brought up the Book of Daniel. I brought up Mike Timlin. And I brought up the beginning of an old Cal Ripken-like podcasting streak. This has been Locked On MLB. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.